Today on The World Today. Last US and NATO forces leave key Afghanistan base in Bagram. Boeing 737 cargo plane crashes. A cargo jet crashes into sea off coast of Hawaii. Zambia holds state memorial for founding father Kenneth Kaunda, who died last month. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Teniola Shobowale. We begin the program in Afghanistan, where the last US and NATO forces have left the country's Bagram Air Base, the center of the war against militants for some 20 years. According to reports, the air base was handed over to the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces in its entirety, with a ceremony to be held on Saturday. President Joe Biden has said US forces will be gone completely by the 11th of September, ending America's longest war, which has had huge cost in human lives and vast expense. But the withdrawal from the sprawling base north of Kabul comes as the main jihadist group, the Taliban, advances in many parts of Afghanistan. Security analyst Chidi Nwaunu joins us now for more on this. Chidi, at its peak, Bagram Air Base saw more than 100,000 US troops pass through. It was the epicenter of the war to remove the Taliban and hunt down the perpetrators of the 9/11 attacks. This withdrawal is a clear indication that the last of US troops are leaving Afghanistan months ahead of President Biden's September the 11th deadline. Are you getting a sense that this is being rushed in some way?
I think there is a sense in which you could say that the troop withdrawal from Afghanistan is being rushed, but there is also maybe a sense that it's been delayed by quite a bit. So in the first perspective, I think there is a deep fear by the U.S. administration that circumstances on the ground will become so dire that the United States will be forced to intervene, forced to keep troops in country in order to combat the resurgent Taliban. Now, that would mean that President Biden would be going back on his promise, and the United States would remain stuck in a war that it patently can't win, doesn't have the resource, the will, or the capability to win. So I think it's on that note, they are rushing ahead to get out of the country. On the other hand, the war has been going on for over 20 years, so I think it's within it's fair enough to say that the process by which the United States is withdrawing now is something that's long overdue. So once it became apparent that the United States wasn't going to be able to win the conflict, so I think when we look at things, in a rational balance from an Afghan point of view, yes, it might be being rushed, and some allies maybe have complained that they haven't had enough time to draw down. But I think the writing was on the wall, or has been on the wall for several years in this regard.
This, like you mentioned, this is a nearly 20 years war. How optimistic are you about the safety of this region with this departure? Is America's work and NATO's work done here?
The safety of the region following the US withdrawal is going to be questionable. Now, this is an unstable region in the first place. The invasion of Afghanistan by the United States back in 2001 initially did bring in a certain element of stability. However, the mishandling of the occupation made this region much more unstable, gave the Taliban an opportunity to entrench themselves further and gain new capabilities. But the most destabilizing effect was obviously the invasion of Iraq, which created a nexus for a safe haven for insurgencies, and not just a safe haven, but kind of a training academy for insurgents to learn how to fight and defeat, superior conventional forces. Now, Afghanistan has always been unstable. What we're seeing now is just one more iteration of a civil war in Afghanistan that has gone on for almost 40 years. The civil war started in the 60s, crystallized in the 70s. The Soviets intervened in the 70s and 80s. Then the foreign powers left. Afghanistan was continued with its civil war. The United States then intervened again in the early 2000s, and now 20 years later they're pulling out. So this is not something that anybody is going to be able to sit down and solve, sitting externally. It is an Afghan problem that has to be solved, and somehow, in some way, the Taliban and other elements will have to balance themselves out. Either that will mean different spheres of influence, or it will mean that they'll have to get some sort of government of national unity between themselves. This is unlikely, but that's the only solution. The region itself will see the aftershocks, mainly in Pakistan, which has played a very key role in this conflict in terms of how they've managed to support the Taliban, but at the same time get significant support and aid from the United States. Other actors such as the stans, the Tajikistan, the Kazakhstan, all of these, Uzbekistan, on the northern border, not Kazakhstan, will also have to try and balance their own interests, which include having ethnic minorities within Afghanistan, but also trying to deal with the spillover of not just the violence, but drug trafficking and possibly their own Islamist insurgencies.
The agreement with the Taliban on the U.S. pullout was struck under the administration of former President Donald Trump. In exchange for the U.S. withdrawal, the Taliban has vowed to prevent any armed group from launching international attacks from Afghan soil. Do you see them sticking to their promise?
The probability of the Taliban sticking to their promises is a good question, but I think it's kind of slightly, I wouldn't say immaterial, but I think it's something that maybe doesn't have that great an effect on the fate of Afghanistan. As we can see nowadays, it's very easy for any group to plan an attack. You don't need a country to plan an attack. You don't need a country to train for an attack. You don't even need a country to source the materials for an attack. So even if a terrorist group wants to plan attacks against the West, they don't need to be in Afghanistan. Their presence in Afghanistan will be mainly having an effect on either Afghanistan itself or on foreign countries. So even if the Taliban kept its promise to the West, it made no such promise to China. So Uyghurs could set up an insurgent group in Afghanistan to target China. The same, as I said, with countries like Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, or even Pakistan. The Pakistanis could set up groups in Afghanistan to target India, etc., etc. So it's a regional problem that needs to be solved or looked at from a regional perspective.
All right, then, security analyst Chidinwa, thank you so much for your thoughts on the program. And away from Afghanistan, the United States says China's rapid buildup of its nuclear forces is concerning and calls on Beijing to engage with it on practical measures to reduce the risk of destabilizing arms races. U.S. State Department spokesperson Ned Price says the buildup has become more difficult for China to hide, and it appears Beijing is deviating from decades of nuclear strategy based around minimal deterrence.
I think what is fair to say is that these reports and other developments suggest that the PRC's nuclear arsenal will grow more quickly and to a higher level than perhaps previously anticipated. This buildup, it is concerning. It raises questions about the PRC's intent. And for us, it reinforces the importance of pursuing practical measures to reduce nuclear risks. Despite what appears to be PRC obfuscation, this rapid buildup has become more difficult to hide, and it highlights how the PRC appears, again, to be deviating from decades of nuclear strategy based around minimum deterrence.
A Boeing 737 cargo plane has crashed off the coast of Hawaii after reportedly experiencing engine trouble. According to the Federal Aviation Authority, the Coast Guard rescued both people on board. The aircraft was en route from Honolulu to the island of Maui, but went down in the water soon after takeoff, just 2 miles from Kalaeloa Airport. As yet, it's unknown what happened to the plane, while the FAA and National Transportation Safety Safety Board are yet to commence investigation. However, it's noted that this aircraft is not the same as a Boeing 737 MAX, the aircraft temporarily grounded by authorities after two fatal passenger airline crashes in 2018 and 2019. The 737 MAX was cleared to fly again by U.S. regulators in 2020. A wildfire has burned 90% of the village that recorded Canada's highest ever temperature. According to officials, the fire had caused extensive damage to Layton in British Columbia and to surrounding critical infrastructure. Experts say that climate change is expected to increase the frequency of extreme weather events such as heat waves. However, linking any single event to global warming is complicated. The area this week recorded the country's highest ever temperature of 49.6 degrees Celsius, and abnormally high temperatures have been recorded in other parts of North America. Hundreds of Iraqis are protesting in Baghdad over worsening power and water cuts as temperatures exceeded 50 degrees Celsius in some parts of Iraq. At Friday prayer in the Sadr city district of Baghdad, men held a protest criticizing the government for not providing its citizens with enough electricity. Power went out completely across most of the country's provinces before dawn. In some of the worst shortages this year, some main grid electricity had returned to Baghdad by afternoon. Critics say the government, which relies on energy imports from Iran, has failed to develop Iraq's own grid to serve its population. Iraq's electricity minister resigned this week under pressure over the power crisis. Some updates on the COVID-19 pandemic now. The World Health Organization is advising the International Olympic Committee in the run-up to the Tokyo Games opening later this month. It's urging caution so as to stem the spread of the coronavirus. This comes after the WHO warned yesterday that the Euro 2020 is driving a spike in cases in Europe.
We've met several times with the IOC for the Olympic Games, but we do know that even small gatherings like backyard barbecues, if the virus is circulating and you don't take the proper precautions, the virus can spread. The IOC and others have outlined their plans in taking the approach for the Olympics, and we've been engaging with them and advising them on the best use of those plans. We are learning from Euro 2020. We are learning from many of the different events, whether these are religious-based events, whether there are events that are happening related to political rallies. If the virus is present and precautions are not in place, the virus will spread.
Over in South Africa, the head of the Medical Research Council says data from studies show Johnson & Johnson's COVID-19 vaccine works well against the Delta variant that now dominates new infections in the country. Penny Moore, a professor at the National Institute for Communicable Diseases, said that all data collected suggested that the vaccines should work against the Delta variant. Johnson & Johnson said that its single-shot vaccine showed strong promise against the Delta variant and other emerging strains, and also provided durable protection against the infection more broadly. In South Africa, the J&J and Pfizer vaccines are being used in its vaccination campaign.
A couple of questions that I'd like to try and answer. The first is, do the vaccines work? And I think we want to reiterate that all the existing data that we have, laboratory immunogenicity data, effectiveness data, suggests that the vaccines that we have will work against the Delta variant.
Well, are you wondering who will win the Euro 2020 quarterfinals? Well, one psychic apparently, a psychic cat actually, apparently has the answer. We'll tell you who just after the break. Please stay with us. Thanks for staying with us. Still on the COVID-19 pandemic, India has reached the grim milestone of 400,000 deaths from the coronavirus, half of them during a second wave in the past few months that overwhelmed the healthcare system. India has recorded 30.45 million cases since the outbreak of the pandemic last year and is the second most affected country behind the United States, which has 33 million cases. Here's more on this and other developments on our COVID-19 Global Update.
India, the world's second most populous nation, recorded 853 deaths in the past 24 hours, Health Ministry data showed on Friday. That took it past the 400,000 mark, with the last 100,000 being added in just 39 days. But health experts believe India may have undercounted deaths significantly, and the actual number could have reached 1 million or even higher. Over in Australia, Prime Minister Scott Morrison says Australia will halve the number of international arrivals into the country to ease pressure on its hotel quarantine system as the country battles to contain outbreaks of the Delta variant. Australia will only receive about 3,000 overseas travellers, and lowering the caps on will be finalised by July the 14th, though some states can move earlier. South Korea's daily count of coronavirus cases has topped 800, the highest in nearly 6 months due to new cluster infections and the spread of the highly contagious Delta variant. Authorities are particularly concerned about a new outbreak traced to an English language academy just outside the capital, with at least 242 cases, including the Delta variant, confirmed there. German Health Minister Jens Spahn has announced measures to boost the effectiveness of the country's vaccination program against an expected wave of the Delta variant of COVID-19, which is more infectious. The health minister says that it will in future be possible to combine the first shot of the AstraZeneca vaccine with a second shot of mRNA vaccine like those from BioNTech, Pfizer or Moderna. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson said he does not plan to order a reduction in crowds attending the remaining Euro 2020 football tournament matches due to take place in London's Wembley Stadium. The World Health Organization said on Thursday that crowds at the Euro 2020 stadiums and in pubs and bars in host cities were driving the current rise in coronavirus infections in Europe.
Meanwhile, in a year marked by the global pandemic, the UN Refugee Agency says the focus in 2020 was to advocate for the inclusion of refugees in COVID-19 national response plans amid major health challenges. This year, the agency is pushing countries to include refugees in vaccination programs. In Africa, Senegal and Cameroon have already registered refugees for COVID-19 vaccines.
The UN Refugee Agency, UNHCR, says refugees and asylum seekers have begun receiving COVID-19 vaccinations in 91 of the 162 countries being monitored so far, and is calling on states to increase refugee inclusion. At the onset of the pandemic, access to health facilities significantly reduced for refugees amidst movement restrictions and the fear of getting infected, according to the agency. A senior official noted the critical role that volunteer health workers have played.
We also were involved in training staff to both diagnose and to manage cases. And one of the larger areas that we were working on is also communicating with communities. So letting the communities know what was happening and what they could expect, trying to pass on information about how to minimize the risk of transmitting COVID, where they could go if they got symptoms.
In the first half of 2020, refugee resettlement fell 69% from 2019 levels to just over 10,000. UN data shows the program resumed in June, but at a much slower pace. The pandemic hit as attitudes to immigrants were hardening, loosening another thread in increasingly frayed international efforts to maintain global solidarity. Burton says measures were taken to ensure that refugees continue to have safe access to essential services in 50 countries hosting 16.5 million refugees.
We wanted to make sure, for example, that people that were stable and needed chronic disease medications, that they didn't need to come to the clinic, that we could look at alternative means of providing them with services and delivering medicines to their homes. We wanted to make sure that pregnant women, were still able to come to the health facility to deliver, and that they knew that, and they knew that that was important.
In Africa, Senegal and Cameroon allowed refugees to register for vaccines in designated health facilities and city councils in the vicinity of their communities. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, the region's largest awareness-raising campaign on the pandemic has reached more than 1.7 million people since the beginning of the pandemic. In several countries, vaccination sites are located far from where refugees live, which could deter them from seeking immunization. This is the case particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, where newly reported cases are on the rise, in contrast to the observable decline in many parts of the world.
Now, several African leaders have paid tribute to the late Kenneth Kaunda, the country's founding father, Zambia's founding father, and icon of African nationalism, who died last month at the age of 97. A state memorial has been held in his honor in the capital, Lusaka. Some of the dignitaries present were the presidents of Ghana, South Africa, Kenya, Zimbabwe, Namibia, Malawi, among others. Zambia's military had been flying the Liberation Heroes' body to the country's 10 regions to give the public an opportunity to pay their last respects. President Edgar Lungu on Thursday night addressed the nation and declared public holidays for the day of the memorial and the funeral on Wednesday. The former president will be buried next week at a private ceremony for family and invited guests. The UN's World Food Programme has resumed deliveries in Ethiopia's Tigray region, but says it faces continuing access problems and is way behind in bringing life-saving supplies to people facing starvation. The Tigray People's Liberation Front, the former rulers in the area, said on Monday it was back in control of the regional capital, Mekelle, after nearly 8 months of fighting. And now finally on the programme, if you're keeping up with the Euro 2020, take a listen to this. Achilles, the cat from Russia's national heritage, is predicted has Spain's victory over Switzerland in the upcoming quarter-final match. Well, bowls with cat food are traditionally placed before Achilles next to the flags of national football teams, and the cat makes his choice by eating from one of the 2 bowls in front of him, and in doing so, he selects the winner. Well, this time, the cat did not take much time and chose the plate on the Spanish side. Achilles has already delivered several correct predictions in this championship and only getting 1 wrong, so the chances are quite high. Well, are you convinced? I guess we'll have to wait and see. Thank you so much for watching the programme. I'm Teniola Shobowale. Have a lovely weekend.